Imagine being born in Switzerland in the 15th century. You open your eyes in a quiet land where snow-capped mountains stand like eternal walls separating heaven and earth. There is no sea, no fertile plains, only cold lakes, dry air, and the harsh edge of stone. The people around you are sparse, and your homeland feels as if it has been forgotten by time. As you grow up, you see the neighbors' children leave the village, crossing the border into Germany to work as servants in noble households. And the stronger young men, they become mercenaries, selling their strength to distant kingdoms in exchange for the promise of a full meal and just enough wages to send home. A natural question arises: what will this country live on? And how did Switzerland from such ashes become one of the wealthiest and most prosperous nations on earth, with a per capita GDP exceeding $80,000? The story begins with the mountains once thought to be a curse. Yet it was precisely that harshness that gave birth to resilience. On the rugged slopes of the Alps and Jura, the ancient Swiss learned how to tame nature. They grew crops, raised livestock, and most importantly, harvested precious milk. From milk, they made butter and cheese, nutrient-rich products that could be preserved for long periods. Butter and cheese became Switzerland's first exports to the world, slowly but steadily. The 19th century marked the redrawing of Switzerland's economic map. Cantons like Zurich, Basel, and St. Gallen underwent dramatic transformations. Zurich specialized in silk weaving and spinning. St. Gallen gained fame for textiles. Bern rose with its premium cheese, and Basel became a sanctuary of pharmaceuticals and chemicals. Watches, the eternal symbol of precision and time, began to spread from Geneva to Basel. The banking and insurance industries also flourished, especially in Geneva, and Zurich, places now likened to secret vaults of global wealth. But what sparked this entire journey? It wasn't just hard work, but the ability to see potential in things that seem small. By the early 19th century, Swiss cheese had already reached across Europe and into North America. Meanwhile, cacao, the strange bean, Christopher Columbus had brought back from the Americas, took over a century to arrive in Switzerland. But once it arrived, it never left. The invention of milk chocolate was a historic moment. Who was the first to think of blending cacao with milk? That question remains debated. But one thing is certain: only when it came into Swiss hands did the dark gift of the New World truly transform into a sweet art. From that point, Swiss chocolate became a global culinary heritage. At this point, Swiss history began to intertwine with foreign names, people who chose this land as a place for a new beginning. One of them was Heinrich Nestlé, later known to the world as Henri Nestlé. Born in Frankfurt, he left a chaotic Germany for Switzerland, a peaceful, neutral land. Nestlé not only created infant milk formula, but also helped lay the foundation for the modern Swiss food industry. But why is Switzerland neutral? The answer takes us back to the year 1515. After being defeated by the French army at the Battle of Marignano, Switzerland abandoned its ambitions of territorial expansion. They chose to stay out of all wars, bringing an end to the glorious era of mercenaries and ushering in a new era, neutrality for the sake of survival. But precisely because of this neutrality, Switzerland became a haven for waves of political wartime and religious refugees. Napoleon once occupied this country, but after his defeat at Waterloo, Switzerland was officially recognized as a permanent buffer zone between France and Austria at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. The story doesn't end there. If you'd like, I'll continue with the next chapter, where Switzerland enters the 20th century, faces 2 world wars, and builds a banking system that would shake empires. Neutrality, a policy that might seem like retreat from the game of power, turned out to be the launchpad for Switzerland's ascent throughout the rest of its history. While Europe was ravaged by endless wars, this small country, positioned between 2 infamous Axis powers during World War II, stood still amid the storm, like an immovable island in a chaotic ocean. But Switzerland did not just stand still to survive, it stood still to grow. Because when brilliant minds were forced to flee their homelands to escape violence and hatred, Switzerland was one of the first places they turned to, bringing with them knowledge, capital, skills, and even the secrets of refined craftsmanship. This wasn't something new. Rewind to 1572, when Paris burned during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. 20 Protestants were executed in the streets. Blood flowed and a quiet wave of migration began. The survivors brought with them the secrets of alchemy, crystal engraving, and one profession that would forever be tied to Switzerland watchmaking, and they didn't come only from France. In 1839, a former Polish officer named Norbert de Patek arrived in Geneva. From that life in exile, the Patek Philippe watch brand was born, becoming a symbol of class and craftsmanship. Nearly a century later, Leo Sternbach, a Jewish scientist fleeing Nazi Germany, settled in Switzerland and invented Valium, the golden sedative for pharmaceutical giant Roche. Even Nicholas Hayek, founder of Swatch, the bold icon of innovation in watchmaking, was of Lebanese origin. From science to industry, from watches to medicine, immigrants have left a profound mark on Switzerland's economic DNA. To this day, nearly half of the CEOs of Switzerland's largest companies are foreigners. Thomas Scheinecker of Roche holds both German and Austrian citizenship. Vasant Narasimhan of Novartis is an Indian American. And the list goes on, because Switzerland, more than anywhere else, understands that neutrality does not mean isolation. In fact, neutrality has made global partners trust Switzerland more than nations that were once battlefields. While much of Europe struggled with material shortages and war disruptions, Switzerland became an extension of global commerce, especially in banking, watchmaking, food, and pharmaceuticals. However, not everything went smoothly. During World War I, Nestlé, then a growing company, faced a serious crisis. With factories scattered across Europe, transporting materials and distributing goods became a nightmare. Costs skyrocketed, but instead of shrinking, Nestlé made a bold move, expanding to the United States, a country less affected by the war. It wasn't just a move for survival, it was the beginning of a global giant. In World War II, as Nazi Germany cast its shadow across Europe, Switzerland remained untouched. And thanks to its expansion outside Europe, Nestlé avoided the war trap. In fact, it benefited. When German products were boycotted in Britain and France, Nestlé quickly filled the gap. From its neutral stance, Switzerland sent a message to the world: we don't fight, but we can supply weapons, food, and the safest place on earth to store your assets. When the US entered the war in 1941, Nestlé became the main milk supplier for the American military. The company's revenue soared from $100 million before the war to $225 million by the time the conflict ended in 1945. But war didn't just propel Nestlé to new heights. It also reshaped a cultural icon, the Swiss watch. In the past, watches were primarily pieces of jewelry, a silver-plated brooch or a pendant with tiny hands for women. But then war changed everything. On the battlefield, precision meant survival. A single second off could cost hundreds of lives, and so the wristwatch was born first as military equipment, then gradually becoming a post-war symbol of masculinity. Switzerland was not absent from this transformation. They supplied watches to both sides, not only to survive but to define quality. After the war, Swiss watches became the global standard. Today, the industry accounts for about 2.5% of national GDP, a modest figure yet unmatched in symbolic value. And no matter how dazzling a watch may be, it still pales in comparison to a quieter but far more powerful industry, banking. While the rest of Europe burned under bombs, Switzerland stood not fighting, yet still prospering. Between the two devastating world wars, nations at war, whether victorious or defeated, all suffered the same consequence: rampant inflation, devalued currencies, and destroyed assets. Amid this chaos, Switzerland stood out as a fortress of trust, becoming the world's most reliable safe. That trust didn't come by accident. It was built over centuries as Switzerland opened its arms to the persecuted Protestant reformers, Jewish communities, people who lived in constant fear for their property and families. They found not only refuge here, but also a sanctuary for preserving their wealth during times when the world had lost its compass. During World War II, even Nazi Germany, despite its ambition to conquer, sent gold to Switzerland. They exchanged gold for Swiss francs, a neutral currency with real value, to buy war supplies from markets outside Europe. Switzerland knew the origins of that gold, much of it looted from Jewish families or occupied nations. And after the war, this led to serious moral controversy. Did that gold help boost the Swiss economy? Possibly. But more importantly, the image of a discreet, trustworthy, and apolitical country caused streams of capital, both clean and murky, to flow into Swiss banks like an underground river that never stops. These funds, whether driven by fear or by the need for secrecy, help strengthen domestic lending capabilities, indirectly spurring the growth of the internal consumer market. Today, finance, including banking and insurance, makes up about 9% of Switzerland's GDP. But the Swiss have never allowed themselves to rely on a single income stream. They don't live only on milk, cheese, watches, or banking. They emerged from poverty, from barren hills and frigid valleys, places where there was nothing but perseverance, your frugality, and faith in education. The greatest lesson the Swiss have internalized: people are the only resource they can truly count on. That's why they invest heavily in research and development. Per capita, Switzerland ranks among the top countries for R&D spending in the world. It's no surprise that global giants like Nestlé, ABB, Novartis, Roche, or Swatch all bear the imprint of this small nation. The phrase "Swiss-made" found on a watch, face, a milk carton, or a medicine label is more than just an origin mark. It's a commitment to precision, durability, finesse, and professional pride. It's the quiet defiance of a people once overlooked, who rose through discipline and their ability to turn disadvantages into strengths. Look at Switzerland's terrain: towering mountains, icy rivers, once seen as obstacles to development, but now major draws for global tourism. In the late 18th century, British nobles, adventurers, and seekers of the exotic were the first to arrive. They sought not just scenery, but also serenity and luxury. And that very demand gave birth to a new industry: luxury hospitality. Cesar Ritz, born into a poor farming family, was the first to turn lodging into an art form. He set the standards for elegance and refinement, leaving behind a legacy for the global hotel industry, a hotel chain bearing his name that became synonymous with sophistication. Today, tourism contributes about 2.6% to Switzerland's GDP. But more importantly, it shapes an image: a clean, picturesque country where time seems to slow down and where everything runs on schedule. Yet behind that peaceful exterior lies one of the most complex political systems in the world, built on the principle of maximum independence. Domestically, Switzerland's cantons are not tightly bound like US states or Canadian provinces. Each canton is almost an independent entity, coming together primarily to defend themselves against external threats. As historian James Brading once described, they are like farmers who all choose to buy cabbages at the same market, agreeing to a low-cost social contract, trading a bit of freedom and responsibility for long-term stability. Switzerland's direct democracy system is also one of the most unique models in the world. Policies are decided not only by parliamentarians, but also by the people through referendums from the federal to the local level. Tax policies, even corporate tax rates, are decided on a canton-by-canton basis, and the competition between cantons, as well as with other countries, creates a highly flexible environment for business. It's no coincidence that major corporations all want to base their headquarters here. In 2021, the corporate tax rate in Switzerland was only 11.9%, nearly half of the US rate of 26.5%. But tax policy is just the tip of the iceberg. What truly attracts global corporations is not just cost savings, but access to a local workforce that is skilled, multilingual, and globally minded. That's why all Swiss cantons, despite operating almost independently, share one common trait: a strong investment in education. A prime example is ETH Zurich, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, a school regularly ranked among Europe's top technical universities, competing with the likes of MIT and Stanford. From here, future engineers, researchers, and inventors are trained in an environment infused with Swiss innovation. Thanks to such an ecosystem, Switzerland continues to attract waves of immigrants not fleeing war as before, but talented individuals seeking a springboard for global careers. It's no surprise that companies on the Fortune Global 500 list maintain a strong presence in this small nation. But behind that halo of glory, Switzerland is now facing a series of challenges, many of which stem from the very factors that once fueled its success. In 1990, Switzerland was the top destination for American companies to set up their European headquarters. But just 2 years later, its decision not to join the European Economic Area (EEA) shifted the balance. Tech giants like Apple and Samsung began relocating their headquarters to more open cities such as Amsterdam or Dublin, places that offered easier access to the EU market while optimizing costs. The strain wasn't limited to economics. Politics and national image also came under pressure. When the war in Ukraine broke out, Switzerland, long praised for its neutrality, surprised the world by joining the EU and imposing sanctions on Russia. Yet at the same time, it refused to supply weapons to Ukraine. Half supportive, half reserved, this middle ground stance left neither side entirely satisfied. Then came a hard blow from across the Atlantic. The U.S. government announced that Switzerland had helped its citizens evade around $2 billion in taxes through secret bank accounts. The ensuing investigation and diplomatic pressure from Washington cracked the once impenetrable wall surrounding Swiss banking. A symbol once hailed as the global fortress of trust was now forced to open up. Meanwhile, Switzerland's key industries like pharmaceuticals and watchmaking, once national prides, also began to feel the strain. Global competition, brand value shifts, and emerging technologies are forcing them to adapt. But the Swiss have never been ones to surrender. History remembers Nestlé survived and thrived through wartime, and Swatch, a modest name, saved the entire Swiss watch industry from collapse when Japanese watches swept the market. Now Switzerland once again stands at a historical crossroads. But if there's one thing this country has proven through the centuries, it is its resilience, its ability to reinvent itself. Can they once again turn adversity into a springboard as they have before? Let's wait and see. Because for the Swiss, a challenge is never the end, but merely the start of something new.